why are we doing this? Why would anyone want to come and be a part of this group? As you know, that nobody gets paid to teach in our group, and even if you teach, like, you don't get a discount off of classes or anything, and you put a lot of time into it. If you ask the Shakespeare mentors, they put so much time. So why would somebody want to do this if, like, what do you get back from this? And so, in the world, you know, when you take classes, then you pay a teacher, and that's kind of your interaction. You pay for time. But in ours, the medium is I mean, you can pay in money, but in ours, it's time. And the reason why we do it is there's only one reason you would ever do it. It's if you loved it. If you love the people here, if you love the children, if you love the other moms. The only reason that someone would stick with our group is because of love. And so we want to invite a culture where we can love each other. And that's why Cassandra's kids will never leave. And why my kids never want to leave is because we feel that love. And you know that the mentors love the kids that they are mentoring. And we love each other, we help each other in so many more ways. It's not just a financial transaction that we are conducting here. We are investing in each other, in our time and love for each other. And so that's why our culture, and we have this little niche that is not found very often in very many places around the country. That if you look for homeschool groups, ours is really different. To find a group where we can be willing to give so much of ourselves for each other. And so that's why we feel like this is just kind of something special that we have here. A group of people who believe the same, who have the same principles that we're trying to instill in our children, and that we have the same kind of principles that we want to treat each other with. And so to help us with this, so it sounds great to love, but so then we need some help in our vision. How do we share with each other what we're trying to accomplish here? And so we have written a vision statement. And to be honest, when we sat down to write this vision of what we want for our group, I thought it would be something completely different than what we came up with. What I was thinking that we would have like maybe 4 subjects that were important to teach or something like that. But as I have been, from the first time that we wrote down these things of the vision, it has really resonated with me, and I feel like it's really inspired of what we need right now, what our kids need right now. And it's just not something that I had thought that this is where we would go with this vision. And as I've been studying it and trying to internalize it more and understand it more and see how does that really pertain to our group and how we can incorporate it all into our group, I really feel, I just feel really inspired by what we have written and what we want for our children and what we want for each other. So read it. This is our vision of our group: to inspire within our children a sense of vision, the ability to find truth, opportunities to express creativity, and a desire to become servant leaders. And so we've been talking about that, and now I want to really focus on how do we actually do that? What does that look like in our classes? What does that look like with each other? How do we actually use this vision to be a part of our school, not just something that we put on a wall, but we really want to incorporate this into everything that we do and teach in our group. So we're going to start with vision. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And so that's the first thing we want to instill, is this sense of vision. Vision for us, vision for them. And so Elder Vincent Halleck, he said, how do we, amidst the challenges of our lives, gain the vision necessary to do those things that will bring us closer to the Savior? So, after I said it first, I have written some questions, so I want us to have more discussion. Like, how do we actually do this? Like, what do you see? What are your challenges with this? What are solutions, ideas that you have? So, reading it again. How do we, amidst the challenges of our lives, gain the vision necessary to do those those things that will bring us closer to the Savior.
One word I always use is perspective. Being able to see, well, in the gospel, where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going, have that perspective of the whole picture.
So how does that help you, like in mentoring? Like, how does that picture help you?
It helps me not get caught up in little details that might cause tension between a mentor and a scholar, but also helps me focus on inspiring them, helping them to see the whole picture. Like, the reason why you want to learn this is because of where you're going and who you are and what you want to become, not because I'm making you fulfill a requirement every day.
That reminds me of in the Revolutionary War, when von Steuben came over. He was gonna the soldiers, the American soldiers, were this ragtag bunch of men, and they had no structure and anything to their training. So he came over to kind of whip them into shape, and he said that he learned very quickly that with the Germans, you just told them what to do and they did it. With the Americans, you had to tell them why they were doing it, and then they would do it amazingly better than anyone who just told what to do. And that's what we're doing with the vision. If they know why they're doing it, then they will rise even higher. That vision. Anyone else have why? How do we do this when we're challenged? Like, how do you keep this vision going with the world?
So as we were entertaining the idea of homeschooling for kids, a good friend of mine who had homeschooled for a number of years, she says the thing you have to remember is that these are God's children, and He knows them better than even you. Yes, even better than you. She says you will have times where you will easily go to prayer and ask for guidance and what to do. Just remember, don't pray for your children collectively. Pray for them individually. And so as I kept reading that question, that's what kept coming into my mind. As I have heeded her advice that when I am facing a challenge in how to gain that vision, that of what to do, where to go, what's the right path, it's always been that I've had to go to the Savior and say, these are your children. What does Alexis need? And what does Brooke need? And ask individually.
I think along with that, one of the things, a tool that I haven't used much yet, but I hope to employ it a lot more next in the years to come, is just doing a blank page write about my kids. Like after praying, like writing down like what do they need from me? It's not what do they need, it's what do they need from me? What tools do they need from me in order to carry out their vision? Because when you focus on what you think the child needs, it completely changes. And it's like, that's the first part, what do you want for this child? But then, what do I need to do for this child? And it's more about you being, but I also feel that we can do that for the classes that we mentor, is that Oliver DeMille, for those who don't know, the founder of Thomas Jefferson Education, and it's a talk that he's given, he talks about what do you want your scholars to know, to feel, and to do. And when I've changed my perspective and tried to look at it from that, even though it's very new to me and I still struggle with it a lot, it's really changed how I approach trying to get the vision for what that particular group of scholars needs.
I really like that it needs to be individual, and then focus on what you can give to help them in their next path.
I also think, like, if you look at the way the Savior taught, it was simple. like he would give simple stories or analogies, and they would have really intense meaning or be very inspiring. And so I think in the way that we teach, we have to look for those simple things. Like, it's not always really difficult, but we tend to make it difficult. Like, we put more on ourselves than we should as far as like preparing a lesson. Sometimes it's a matter of being prepared and letting, you know, the Spirit guide you, or feeling like you can, you know, go with your instinct for what the class needs instead of feeling like you have to do whatever lesson you prepared or whatever. So I think sometimes just simplifying a little bit and giving more leeway for a conversation in a class, or, you know, because that's, I mean, if you really look at how the Savior taught, it was that way. It was conversation and stories, and I would imagine it was fun, you know. So I think if we employ those things, and then most of all love, you know, if you're showing these kids that you love them, then everything else will fit into place if we do those things.
Leads perfect. Oh, sorry, no, you. Okay, we'll come back to it. That leads perfectly, which where we're, the Savior saw more in those humble fishermen whom he called to follow him than they initially saw themselves. He saw a vision of who they could become. He knew of their goodness and potential, and he acted to call them. They were not experienced at first, but as they followed, they saw his example, felt his teachings, and became his disciples. There was a time when some of his disciples departed from him because the things that they heard were hard for them. But where the others might also depart, Jesus inquired of the 12, "Will ye also go away?" Peter's response reflects how he had changed and had caught the vision of who the Savior was. "To whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life," he responded. With that vision, these faithful and devoted disciples were able to do hard things as they traveled to preach the gospel and establish the church after the Savior had departed. Eventually, some of them made the ultimate sacrifice for their testimonies.
Well, so I haven't taught in the Commonwealth, and, you know, just in terms of thinking about with my own kids. Sometimes I'm tempted to go into the route that I need to provide them with what I need to kind of give them all they need, you know what I mean? But to have the Lord has, our Heavenly Father and our Savior have such trust in us as individuals, really, you know, the amount of faith that they display for us, sending us to earth, let us choose good paths or not, to follow or not. That's a tremendous amount of faith in them and in us, and we should have that same faith in our kids. Faith that they can be agents to themselves and choose good. We should invite them and encourage them, but also to, I guess, you know, anticipate their putting tremendous amounts of value in, not just in their own work, but to the class, to everyone, and that they will choose good if offered to them often, and sometimes they won't. And that failure or choosing things that aren't good isn't a failure of the class or a failure of your teaching, but sometimes that's part of the experience, that we learn a lot from failure. We learn a lot from disappointing people. We learn a lot from the kind of negative side of that trust, of that faith. You know, when we let our Heavenly Father down and we have to go repent, which happens pretty often, you know, then that's really educational for us. And it's not being over when that happens. So we should maintain that perspective with our kids, that how they're being right now is not a picture of the trajectory, necessarily a picture of the trajectory that they're going to travel.
Yep. And that takes the vision. Like he saw, I mean, they weren't perfect, they weren't very experienced to begin with. He saw the vision of what they were going to become. And when they caught the vision of what they could become, they could do hard things. I mean, at that point when Savior was crucified, Peter still wasn't as strong. I mean, he still denied Christ at that point. But that wasn't the end game. That wasn't the end. He went on to prove over and over again that he did have testimony of Christ, that he did stand firm for him from that. And the Savior had that vision of him. And when they had their own vision of themselves, they could do amazing things.
This made me think of the question you asked, how do we do it when we're challenged? And for me, learning about people who have done it, so learning about people in scriptures, but also learning our history, people who have faced difficult situations and who have caught the vision of freedom, of who we can become. They inspire me, so that's why in our school, history is important, because learning about history can give us a vision for what we can do.
And that's why we're trying to design our history classes that way. The history is supposed to give us vision, to understand where we've come from and where we can go, how we can learn from that to go further.
I think also looking at our own personal history, times where I've felt challenged and I've turned my will and my life over to the Savior and seeing what He's done for me and the vision He's given me. When I face future hard times, I return to my own personal history to remember that He was faithful to me. And that gives me vision to continue forward in difficult times.
So the things from they saw his example, they felt his teachings, and they became. So as we are planning classes, they need to first see our example for them, and for, they need to see our example. They need to feel what we're teaching is true, and then they need to do. So it's not just enough to come and feel these things, but we have to actually go do something with those feelings. So as we're planning lessons and experiences for them to do, then try to keep those three things to be an example of that principle, to help them feel what you're teaching is true, and to do something with it. So how do we create experiences that will instill a vision, a sense of vision, that our youth will be able to do hard things? Like real experiences, like what kind of things can you do in your classroom that would instill that vision?
Stretch and give them hard things to do. But be there, and don't just say, oh, do the hard thing. Have fun, Let me know when you're done. It's a support them through everything.
So it's ironic that we're going to be studying World War II, because that's my favorite thing to study. But my son came home with after President Obama visited Hiroshima and said, "Mom," and I still remember him in Japan, so I visited Hiroshima and everything. And he said, "Mom, war is never the answer." So we sat down and we talked, and if I can incorporate, why did they do that? What were the consequences? What were the consequences of them if they had not done it? So it's not just this feel-good answer necessarily, but give them opportunities to weigh both sides, and both have losses. There is no good decision. There is a best decision, but you know what I'm saying? There's no happy ending for everybody. And yet, how many times did the forefathers in our country have to choose things where they knew people would lose their lives and they knew families would be torn apart, and yet they continued because they made the necessary choice. So just give them opportunities to see both sides, even if you can't win in every way. What would you do anyway?
One way I like to do that is through history and biographies. And we're studying the lives of great people and the choices they made and what consequences their choices had, one way or another. But especially just role models, giving them role models.
That way they don't have to do all of the choices and experiences for themselves. They can see where those consequences led to without. If they were bad.
Right, well, hopefully their lives will inspire them to want to do some of those things, and they will know enough about their lives to know that it wasn't easy. It didn't just come to them because we're super talented or just gifted. It was a process, and often an up and down process. But so if they learn enough details about their lives, catch that vision.
I think one of the things that a tool that's really important to use, and you do a great job with this, Misty, in the classes you've created, is the concept of a simulation. They have to be put into situations where there's a conflict or a problem to solve that requires both individual work, but where a group relies upon them. And so that's one of the things I really love about Thomas Jefferson Education, and that in this group in particular has been the focus on simulations, which is a group activity. Like, just to give an example for those who might not know what I'm talking about, in a class I just taught, we read Alas, Babylon, and one of the simulations that we did related to it was, it's a book about a nuclear catastrophe, and we just put them in a situation like if you were, on the governing board of this city, and you had to make these choices, and you were a doctor, and you were a, whatever. What resources would you need? What decisions would you make? And we did it on a very small scale. It would have been better done on a larger scale, but just putting themselves into that situation and then having to, resolve it.
Great. That leads into the next one, truth. Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them pick themselves up very off, as if nothing had happened. So we often see truth, or it's hidden, and people don't recognize it when they see it. So, watch.
Of course.
I've been with this man, Captain, your crew, for my crew. You betrayed us. Oh, you are smart, Mr. Spock. Spock, don't stop! Mr. Spock, give me my crew. What will you do when you get them? Continue the work we were doing before we were banished.
Which, as I understand it, involves the mass genocide of any being you find to be less than superior.
Shall I destroy you, Mr. Spock? What will you give me?
You have no transport capabilities.
Fortunately, mine are perfectly functional. Drop your shields.
If I do so, I have no guarantee we will not destroy the Enterprise.
Let's play this out logically then, Mr. Spock. Firstly, I will kill your captain to demonstrate my resolve. Then, if yours holds, I will have no choice but to kill you and your entire crew.
If you destroy our ship, you will also destroy your own people.
Your crew requires oxygen to survive. Mine does not. I will target your life support systems located behind your office. After every single person aboard your ship suffocates, I will walk over your cold corpses to recover my people. Shall we begin?
No shields.
A wise choice, Mr. Spock.
CO-72 torpedoes are still in their tubes. If they're not mine, Commander, I will know it. Vulcans do not lie. The torpedoes are yours.
Thank you, Mr. Spock.
I have fulfilled your terms. Now fulfill mine.
Well, Captain, seems apt to return you to the crew. After all, no ship should go down without her captain.
Okay, my husband was like, how in the world does that go with your lesson? Like, yeah, exactly, you should be asking that question. And so, bringing clips in to discuss things in a class is great. In this clip, hopefully, you see a connection that there was this stream of logic that was going on back and forth. If I do this, then what are you going to do? Well, if you don't do this, then this and this is going to happen. Well, if you do this, and this and this. So they were going back and forth, figuring out the logic of what was going to be the end consequence of their decisions. They were struggling to figure out how, both of them, of which consequence they wanted and how to get there. And if they did this, what would really happen? And so that's the kind of dialogue we want in our classes, and asking questions, and asking more questions, and if this happens, then what will happen? And so that's the only way you can get to truth, if you keep asking questions and trying to figure out the process of where does this lead to in the end. So I have a challenge for you. So there is a unicorn dying at the end of a bridge. That's very sad. There is a unicorn dying at the end of the bridge. He has 17 minutes left to live, unless 4 people can join hands around him and recite a magical spell. There are 4 people on the other side of the bridge, but it is very dark and they have 1 flashlight, and the bridge can only hold 2 people at a time. Ginny can cross in 1 minute, Ron in 2, Fred in 5, and Percy in 10. Can they save the unicorn?
Are there any people on the unicorn side of the bridge?
No. Do you know the answer? Okay.
Yes.
What do you think?
If,
can.
If Percy, so the 2 slow ones are Fred and Percy. If they go first while Ron holds the flashlight shining their way.
They have to keep the flashlight with them.
Oh, you can't. Well then,
Because they have community flashlights.
So somebody needs to come, go across and go back. You know?
Yes.
Which would be 1 minute, man.
So Ginny's the best.
that'll take 15 minutes.
He takes Percy, and then Fred, and then Ron, and then all together.
Yeah.
Say it again.
So Ginny goes with Percy and comes back.
So to go over, it takes
10 minutes. One to get back.
Okay. So Percy's left over here, and then, so then Ginny takes
Fred.
So Ginny and Fred come over. Ginny and Fred, and that takes 5. That's over here, and then Ginny comes back.
You're up to 17 minutes.
4 unicorns dead.
Ginny holds each of them on her shoulders and runs them back.
You've seen Ginny, she's awesome, but she's not quite that strong. And the bridge will collapse.
Let him die, I'll power some more.
That's it. But, my unicorn, think of it.
Okay, there's no such thing as
Okay,
unicorns.
so-
Who cares?
Ron and Fred go over and carry the unicorn back.
But the unicorn's happy. Have you seen a horse?
But he's not dead yet. Haven't they died yet?
It's a baby
They
unicorn.
drag him.
It's dying. It is on the ground. Can't move.
They throw the flashlight back?
Wait a minute.
Can't. They're not that good.
So what side of the bridge would, never mind.
Unicorns are there.
Can they meet each other halfway? Or does somebody have to walk in the dark?
There can't be, there can only be 2 people on the bridge at
Or
But-
meet and then switch the flashlight? Or,
they have to have a flashlight with them as they're walking.
that's it.
Because it is an old bridge and they die.
Michael showed me the solution to this once, I can't remember.
Well, can they do the chant on the other side of the bridge, or do they have to be right next to the unicorn?
It has to be right next to
All around one.
Oh,
because that kept really sticking out the line.
I'll read it through.
What is,
So, that's often how we solve problems, is we give it to the best person, the person that's the fastest, we give them more and more stuff, until pretty soon that they're weighed down and they can't do everything. When actually, when we paired up to the slowest people, you know, I'm imagining, like, if this was like a real thing, they were going back and forth, and Jenny was with Percy, and she was probably like totally frustrated and could not walk faster. Like, she was probably nagging him, like, the unicorn's not on the other side, why can't you just walk 1 minute faster? Like, we could get over there in time and save them, and she's probably, that would be a typical response. But when he was with someone who was slower, more his speed, they could walk closer together. Like, it wasn't such a huge gap. And it actually made them faster because they were closer to same pace. And then she could come back fast, but she didn't have to do everything. They spread that around a little bit better, then they actually were faster. And there's probably less contention and stuff. So this has always been a powerful example to me of how when we think we're doing the fastest, then sometimes we're not. And so when you're looking in your classes of ways to incorporate, helping each other help each other, or teams, group projects, then think outside the box of what's really going to help that team. Is it more helpful if the people are more the same level, or sometimes it's better to switch them up? Different groups can give different results, and instead of just trying to have the person who's the best do everything, that group will help. And it's through logic, it's through figuring out the whole consequences, solving the whole problem, and seeing where this will lead to, and that will help us. And that's what we want to instill in kids. When we give them problems that are hard, that don't look like there's an answer to begin with, that we like, there's lots of answers, but we really wanted a solution that was the best. That sometimes it takes a while for us to stumble and figure out a whole bunch of non-desirable answers before we can get one that we like.
Misty, can I say, one thing I really liked about Give Liberty this year is, like, they let the kids try on, like, you're a judge today, you're doing this case, you're on this side, even though you don't believe this side, you're arguing this case, and I'm like, I thought that, it's like Tessa had an incredible experience. She came home so stressed that she had to, like, argue a side she didn't believe in, but she learned a lot about people who do believe that, or whatever. But everybody this year had to really step in and do something out of their comfort zone and play a different role than they would naturally. So I like that too, is like, we find out where their strengths are, but letting them try on a lot of different things instead of just assuming where they fit in and work with them.
yes.
One of my favorite models for thinking about that was actually in the Unleash Your Voice training. So I'm not sure how much was in the class, but with the 3 concentric circles, and the inner circle is the comfort zone, and the outer circle is the danger zone. The circle in the middle is the growth zone. And so, like in that example, they all were kind of, none of them would be in the danger zone because they were going together. But even Ginny, like, having to wait and not take care of it, puts her in the growth zone. And, like Fred and Percy having to go together and be like, that puts them in. So I like to think of that sometimes with people that I mentor, or my own kids, like, how do I get them outside the comfort zone, but not into the danger zone, so that they can continue to grow, and it looks so much different for each person.
Yes. So it's just where the individual comes in. We have to have unique plans for each of them, which can be a challenge, but that's where most growth happens. That's what they need. So those who seek truth will develop the ability to do the following. Know that God is the source of all truth. Understand the long-term consequences of actions. Engage in reflective and independent thinking. Identify, construct, and evaluate arguments. Detect inconsistencies and common mistakes in reasoning. Solve problems systematically. seek relevant sources of information to inform himself, raise vital questions and problems, formulating them clearly and precisely, communicate effectively with others, and figuring out solutions to complex problems. So, just little things, right? No pressure, And I made us like, oh wow, it would be so amazing if I could instill in my youth that. And, wow, how in the world do I do that? It's so almost intimidating, but amazing at the same time. That's what I would like to have, to be the ability to do all of those things. So, how do we engage in deeper conversations with the youth to invite the kind of reasoning that leads to the discovery of truth?
I think using real-world examples would be helpful for them. My daughter right now is learning about government in school, and I think that complexity is really hitting her, and she has a lot of questions, and so that's kind of led to some really good discussions.
They like it when it's real problems. They engage much more.
I think being okay with silence, because often we ask them a question and none of them want to answer. But if you sit long enough, someone's going to say something. And oftentimes it will be something amazing, or someone who doesn't usually talk, but I think often we try to fill that silence just because it's uncomfortable. But if we will let it be, sometimes, like, that's where a lot of times the deeper conversation will come, is because they started.
If you ask a deep question, how can you expect them to, in 1 second, digest it and give you a deep response back? They need time to digest those questions and think about it to give you a deeper response.
And if you just give them the response, they might not internalize that. But if they're coming up with that response because they've had the time and the silence, then they will really internalize that more.
I was thinking too, like relate it to them in their life. I mean, all things are connected.
And when they connect it to themselves, they remember that more, they feel it more.
When I was in, I think 8th grade, we had a cool history opportunity in our history class to, we really dissected the guns of August, like related to World War I, as an 8th grade class. And we had opportunities to argue with them. We really sat and talked about the lead up to the war for a couple weeks. We sat on that problem and talked about it for a long time. And I think for a lot of, but it isn't reasonable to expect people to take complex problems and give you an answer in 1 minute, but even a class time's worth of time or several might not be enough to really think through some complex issues. And not everything can be treated that way, but giving time to maybe at least one question, one subject, one exploration, and kind of let it percolate in your minds as a class to think about, to talk about, to revisit, so that, because things will come up, like, oh, I didn't make that connection, but I think that had a really big influence on why this happened, and then you get to talk about it. Do we agree? Do we not agree? We don't think it was that big of a deal, or whatever, and you get people to really dig deeper.
Yep. And I found that the deeper the questions you get, the less questions you can ask. Like, one deep question can last you the whole class period, because there's so much that goes into that. So you got to be prepared for that. That the deeper the questions you have, the less time you're going to be able to discuss them all. So think deep and not as many. Create. No man has the right to dictate what other men should perceive, create, or produce, but all should be encouraged to reveal themselves, their perceptions and emotions, and to build confidence in the creative spirit. That's Ansel Adams said. So I like that. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to inspire them to create, and show what's inside them, so that the world can see what they perceive and what they can produce. Because you need to see other people's vision of themselves. And can you go back?
deepest yearnings of the human soul. No matter our talents, education, backgrounds, or abilities, we each have an inherent wish to create something that did not exist before. Everyone can create. You don't need money, position, or influence in order to create something of substance or beauty. You might say, I'm not the creative type. If that is how you feel, think again. And remember that you are spirit daughters of the most creative being in the universe. Isn't it remarkable to think that your very spirits are fashioned by an endlessly creative and eternally compassionate God? Think about it. Your spirit body is a masterpiece, created with a beauty, function, and capacity beyond imagination.
When I first heard him say that, that message just went straight into my heart. Like, wow, I hadn't put that principle on the same level as faith, repentance. Really, the power to create and that desire within us is God-given, and that's why he does everything he does. He created the world. He's the great creator, and that is a talent and principle we want to inspire them. Is their God-given talent to create. And so when we provide opportunities for them to create in a way that really expresses who they are and what they think and believe, then we are empowering them to become more like God. And so 3 ways of alchemy that you can foster creativity are to first, I think this is the most important, to provide a safe place to fail. And then allow for different styles of learning and encourage individual expression and unique adaptations. So I love this acronym. FAIL is the first attempt in learning. So if we can instill that in them that when you fail, that is wonderful. That we want you to fail 1,000,000 times in our group because that is just your first attempt in learning. And this is a safe place to fail over and over and over again. And every time you fail, you're going to fail forward. You're going to learn something from that failure. And it's going to make you a better person. I think you learn more from your failures than if you did it right the first time. So if you do it right the first time, then that's probably wrong. Don't do that. Don't do it right the first time. Do it totally wrong the first time so that you'll remember all the things you did wrong and you'll do it right ever after. But how do we create this environment where it's safe to fail? And then how do we know when to rescue and when to let failure be the lesson? Where is that? Where do they have that boundary, those circles?
So the environment of safe to fail is being willing to show that you have failed. So sometimes they need to know, oh, my mentor's not perfect, my mentor struggles with it's okay. Life is life.
And I think that all these principles that we're talking about apply especially to us too. That this group has to be safe for you to fail in. It is okay if you have an awful lesson and that you can't figure things out and you fail in teaching and doing stuff 1,000,000 times in our group. That we will still love you and we will embrace your failure in you and we'll just move forward in that.
And maybe, I don't know, willing to acknowledge real-time failures. Sometimes with my kids say, it's like repentance, that's what it is, right? To my kids to say, I've been doing this wrong with you. I am so sorry. We need to do it right. Let's talk about it. How can we make this better? Because clearly it's not working for everyone because of this, and this. Do you agree? What do you think? And then You know, to give them an opportunity to see you driving forward, to failing forward. Set an example. Because talking about past failures can be useful, but having them involved in your present failures will teach them how to do it their own.
Yeah, I read something, and I totally, it inspired me to think this, but it wasn't what it said. But I was thinking about motherhood. Like what would you give, if you had to give the Mother's Day talk, or talk on Mother's Day, without making everyone feel totally guilty and like worthless scum because you're not perfect, you know? Like how would you talk to mothers about that? And thought, I can't remember it. It is a gift to our children that we are not perfect. And that having an imperfect mother is precious, because then they can see how to resolve not being perfect, because they're not perfect either. So when they watch you struggle with your imperfections, that is a gift to them to see how they can get through their imperfections too. So when you talk about it real time, about your imperfections, then you are giving them a gift to see how that actually works. How do you actually change and do better? How do you learn from those failures and move forward in real time?
So that environment where it is safe to fail would also be setting the parameters or clarifying that when we fail, that there is an adversary there that is trying to make us feel that when we fail, we become the failure, and that there isn't anything further from the truth. And perhaps that's because I'm a natural born perfectionist, that so often when I fail, I have to consciously separate that from that I become the failure because I failed. So I guess coming from my perspective, that my environment where I can create that has to be where everyone understands that the action of failing and the being of a failure are different and not.
Right. They're actually the opposite. God works on our actions and helps us to correct our actions. Satan wants us to feel like we're a failure because of what we do.
I think it goes back again to the learning of history and people, because there's so numerous examples in history of people who are extremely successful, and you can read about their failures that they experienced through their whole life. My kids have been studying Walt Disney and learning about his failures before, now you look at what Disney has become, and they really internalize that, wow, he was not doing so good with that idea or that idea, but they see where things can go eventually. And there's so many, history's full of examples like that, so I think that's a huge learning tool.
Yeah, and if we can create a place where it's not so big to fail. Like if we give them something huge to do and we don't give them tools to do it, and they have this huge jump to go, then we're really setting them to really fail. That's our fault. If we give them if we give them smaller jumps to get up there and show them how to do that, then if they fail, they only fall a little bit, and then they could go up a little bit higher. So if we have our expectations way up too high, and we don't have it to be safe for them to actually make that fall, then that's our responsibility to do that.
I think too, making them feel safe with failing is partially, the stigma of failure in society is that people are going to be angry, there's going to be disappointment, that's the stigma with failure. And so when they learn that in a class, if they fail, that their mentor is going to put their arm around them and say, I know you can do better. This is okay. You did a great job. You just have to work a little bit harder. They get that encouragement, and you're not angry and you're not disappointed, and you make them feel loved. They'll be fine to fail again. You know what I mean? It will be an okay thing, and they'll realize that it is a learning opportunity and that you're not going to be mad at them. I think because of the stigma that we have in society about that, it makes it hard for them. And a lot of them don't want to fail because they're afraid they're going to disappoint or upset their mentors. So once they realize that we're going to love them anyway, then they'll know that it's a safe place.
I was going to say, love them anyway, but we aren't always going to rescue them and come to the aid, even if we know the answer, or we know how they could do it better, or we think we know how they could do it better, you know. And I think that's a challenge. Well, that is a challenge for me as a mom. How do I let my 5-year-old and my 3-year-old work it out? I mean, I'm good at it now. I've had 3 teenage girls, but that are not really good. I won't clarify. But my first instinct is often to rescue or to give the answer. But when I step back and think about it for a moment, usually I'll just say, well, what do you think? Solve it. Look it up. What, you know, if that way didn't work, what's another way that has worked? Or, you know, maybe good ideas from other people. But that's a really important thing, because people expect their parents, having a daughter in college right now, you know, well, she's almost out of money. Well, then what do you do? We're not giving you any more money for college at this point. That's your fault. Deal with it. Oh, where are you going to live? Not here. You know, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be at college, right? So I'm getting better at the whole don't rescue them thing as my kids are having experiences in life and then learning, as opposed to just giving them the easy out. And so it's such a fine line, but it's so important to learn. And it is different for each child. I would never use that approach with another one of my kids who would have who would like go jump off a cliff or something. You know, oh, doesn't love me, you know. So
it always comes back to it's so unique to each person.
It is.
So one thing isn't going to work for everyone. And so to create an environment where it's safe, you have to know if this is the time to rescue them or to let the failure be a lesson. It's so individual.
So when you have that desire to rescue, it's because you're seeing the other person in a very frustrated state. But frustration are the seeds that grow creativity. And that's what we're talking about here, is to create. Because we've already gone through coming up with the other ideas that could solve this challenge. But they don't get to plant those seeds. You have to have that pressure. Every diamond had to encounter pressure in order to become what it is. In some of my challenge course facilitation training, the only time you step into rescue is when physical harm that's the path they're on, is for physical harm. Other than that, failure is a success. It can be.
And I think we need to kind of think about it ahead of time. Mine is the same thing. If it would cause them physical harm or something that they don't understand the consequences of, that can cause irreparable harm later. With a 3-year-old, you obviously don't let them just run into the street and feel the consequences of that. But then, when your daughter runs out of money at college, that's not. It could get a life and death situation, but if it's not, then letting them struggle and figuring out how to get out of it on themselves is so much more powerful than communicating them. That will stick with them for so much longer. Okay, Cassandra, when do you want me to stop? I am wearing 12 minutes.
I mean, it's up to you. It's 11:15 right now.
I know.
So if you want to finish vision, that's fine. How much longer is it?
Learning styles and leadership was really short.
Okay, go ahead, finish it.
Finish it? Okay. So another way to help create creativity is to engage as many learning styles as possible. Learning styles can include visual, pictures, images, diagrams, colors, physical, learning by doing, oral, sounds, rhythms, music, clever rhymes, all of those things. Verbal, when someone's actually speaking the words and using their own words. Logical, social, and solitary. Sometimes we need to learn together as a group, and sometimes we need to learn by ourselves. We need to actually have different, opportunities to do both. What difficulties do you encounter as you try to incorporate different learning styles in your classes? And how can understanding different learning styles help you develop more effective learning experiences and projects? when you're trying to please everyone and make it a lesson to everyone, then sometimes you miss. And you try to make it everything. So how do you do that without doing that?
Well, I think obviously the difficulty is when you have to incorporate learning styles that are not your own. And it's such one thing to sit there and which, oh, how would I even do a kinetic whatever with this? I don't even get it. But on the other hand, like when I go back and plan lessons or topics, like having kind of the list of learning styles like a checklist almost facilitates like filling up the class time even easier, because it's like, okay, do I have something for this? Like you can go through and like check it off almost and put something in. Or if you can't fit it all into one class time, that's okay, because one week you could touch on a few and next week you could touch on a few. And so some weeks some kids might get more out of that lesson and the other kids would get more out of the next lesson, but that's okay too.
Which is, you can't do everything all at once. So that's okay. Just spread it out and try to do it overall.
Oh, I was just thinking that, you know, I learned differently than other people do, but if you can look at the strengths of the different measures too, like I like to teach with activity more, and I really like doing the discussions. I think if you can kind of divide up, know your mentors and what they enjoy and how they enjoy teaching, and use that in your class.
I really like that, because I really struggle with the activity part of it for some reason, and I really like the discussions. And like the person I just mentored with, she was always like, "You like an opening activity, you know," and like she would do the science experiment. So like she had, you know, anyway, I like that. But also, I really liked what Cassandra said earlier about simplicity. I've just really started to learn that. I've always been kind of a complex person. And I really started to understand that if I'm prepared and if I'm thinking about what I need to do, honestly, sometimes some of my best ideas come in the last hour before, even if I've been thinking about it, I'm aware of it, and I'll often have resources from my hand and I pull things together. And if I just follow the flow of the class, it's been really interesting, you know, like how things will just come to me kind of in the last minute, and that address, you know, those individual, you know, scholars. And that's why it's like, it's more about them. It's not more about what I think I need to be. Well, it is partly about that. But when I think about, you know, their individual needs a little bit more, I find that it's a little bit more effective. And when I'm thinking more about what I need to get out or what I need to do, that it's not as effective. And so, anyway.
Yeah, so when we prepare ourselves and then try to keep it simple, then we are better able to respond to those individual needs and cues.
Just a quick, I just want to think, when we were talking about, you know, how do you not overbook too much, and how that, you can't do everything at once, but each week, just like at church, we are given the thing that we need for that week for ourselves. And maybe that week for that student isn't that principle, but the following week or the week after that is something that they need for themselves. So it's okay that it's not their week for that specific thing.
That's great. And so as you're preparing lessons, we encourage you to be creative. I always like to lead with my strengths and then try to work on my weaknesses. If there's something I'm weak on, I first do something I'm strong in so that I can build my confidence, and then try to work on that weakness at the same time and do something little with that. So it helps me to know that I have something strong and I have something. Really quickly, encourage individual expression and unique adaptations. And think of how you can create experiences that allow for creative interpretation and expression and still teach principles that apply to everyone. When you make something simpler and more principle-based, then you allow for more interpretation of how you can express that. This is something that's kind of a challenge. How do you write something like a requirement, an experience for them to do that's open-ended, that can be interpreted in different ways? So the more you can do that, relying on principles, the more you can leave that open for creative expression.
Can I give an example?
Yeah.
It was the soul paper that you asked the INCART scholars to write, and Hannah just can't wrap her head around writing a paper like that. But Misty let her make a comic, and so she drew pictures that expressed the same principles you were looking for, but in a little bit different way that was more unique to her.
And we talked about that. When you write comics, you have to say a lot in a few words, and that's just as challenging as writing lots of words. So that's the same thing. You're writing, you have to really condense it and put it with pictures. And she did an amazing job. So each life creates its own unique symphony, while adding one note at a time by quietly sharing simple acts of service, building treasures of truth, speaking soothing words of love, and managing the mundane. Over a lifetime, this exquisite masterpiece is created layer upon layer, step by step, note by precious note. Listen to the greatness that is you. So as we do this and allow them to be creative, they're creating their own symphony. And it has different notes and different instruments that are in them. And that's kind of our classes too. We need variety. We need them all to share their uniqueness so that we can have this great masterpiece that comes together at the end. If everyone sounds the same, then it's not a symphony. It's not as beautiful, it's not rich and deep. And that's the same with our group too, with you. We want you to all be unique. We want you to share your unique talents and gifts and do it in your unique way. We don't want, there's not one way to homeschool or be a member of this group. You're all different, and that's what we need, is everyone to be themselves, because you are the ones that we need, the way you are. And I don't have time to go into this, but servant leader is the last part of it. And we talk about leadership a lot, so that's why I put it at the end, because we kind of get leadership. But especially focusing on servant leader, that it's not just being the one telling everyone what to do, it's the one that's serving everyone. You have the most power, you are in the position to serve the most and not to be served. So that's what we want to instill. There's so much. It's so wonderful to get to talk, and I love to hear everyone's ideas, and so it's really great. Just as we still hear from more people, then we're going to share more great ideas of how to really actually incorporate this into classes and take the principles and make it into concrete ideas. I don't know how to say it.
Thanks, Misty.